Hello, and welcome to the Aviation Briefing with me, Madison James. In this podcast series, I speak to media and industry guests about the biggest stories in aviation today. Now, I'm pleased to have Clive Wratten with us today. He is the CEO of the Business Travel Association, the trade association for the UK's travel management companies, whose members collectively handle over 90% of all managed travel in the UK. So I'm very glad to have Clive with me today to talk about the EU's entry-exit system. Now, in the peak summer travel season, this has been causing a bit of disruption around Europe. So, Clive, thank you for coming on to talk to me today.
Pleasure. Thanks for inviting me. Look forward to the conversation.
Yeah, we're glad to have you. So, before we get into the discussion, I was just wondering if you could tell me a bit about your own journey into the aviation industry.
Sure.
You know, and the work that you do with the BTA.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, thank you. Well, I've been around the industry for 40 odd years. Most of it spent, all commercial aviation being a big part of it. So I started my career at British Airways as an account manager, worked there for a number of years, loved it, then moved on to Qantas here in the UK. I had a spell as general manager for Gulf Air here in the UK, but
Mm,
the longest role was working at Etihad here in the UK as country manager,
right.
managing the operations here. So aviation has been very close to my heart. And now I am very fortunate to be the CEO of the Business Travel Association, which really means me representing the business travel sector in government, in media, and bringing the industry together to make it a stronger place for all as we move forward.
Right. Fantastic. So you'll have a lot of knowledge, obviously, on how this system is actually affecting, people on the ground.
Well, yes, it has been a
Yeah.
topic of conversation. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So just to recap for the listeners then, the European Union's entry-exit system officially launched on the 12th of October last year, and it's been progressively rolling out across the 29 Schengen area countries. The system became fully operational on the 10th of April this year, completely replacing manual passport stamping and replacing it with a biometric registration process. Um, so for non-Schengen travelers, that will look like scanning your fingerprints and getting your photo taken at the border. Now, these extra steps have resulted in quite significant disruption, especially when combined with a lot of technological difficulties. In some cases, this has caused passengers to, wait hours in queues. They potentially miss connecting flights as well. So it doesn't look good. On the other hand, the EU is arguing that the change is necessary to increase security of the EU's external borders. So, Clive, I'll ask you a relatively straightforward question then. What's your opinion on the entry-exit system? Do you think it's necessary? Do you think it's, inherently flawed? And what are you hearing from the industry stakeholders that engage with your organization?
Sure. Well, first up, I mean, the entry exit system is a positive thing.
Right.
Digitalizing borders is absolutely the right thing to go for security of whatever nation that you're in, and it's the right way to go. And ultimately, should speed up entry and exit for passengers, whether you're a business traveler or a leisure traveler. The issue we have with the current ES in Europe is the rollout, not necessarily the system
Mm,
or anything else, purely the rollout across the nations that has caused immense problems. But it is varied. In fairness, there are some places that it works, but it comes down to, my opinion and that of the many people I speak to, it's been very much around poor implementation that has resulted in some of the issues that you suggested there. I mean, if you look at
mm.
the UK, we rolled out digital entry some while back, and it generally works pretty well without the issues. But we were just one country, so logistically rolling it out across 29 you can see it's quite difficult, different languages and all that kind of stuff, but they had a long time to
Right.
plan for it. So that's the fundamental issue.
Right. Absolutely. And, I'm quite interested to know more about what the reasons behind this, difficulties in implementation. Because as you said, airports had a fair bit of time to prepare, but there seems to be a lot of problems on the technological side, the infrastructure side, and also in areas of staffing. For example, Rome's Fiumicino Airport installed a lot of expensive self-service kiosks, and it's now saying that, it's not fit to take on these large volumes of passengers. There have been reports that some machines aren't working. So, in your opinion, what could have kind of been done to alleviate these problems and make airports kind of more prepared?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's hard to know not being there through the implementation on the coal face, but it seems to
Right,
me and everybody I've spoken to that whilst it was tested, it was never pressure tested in the sense that it didn't suddenly, have I don't know, 5,000 people turning up in a 1 hour period to see if it could cope with the amount of people that were turning up. Clearly, there has also been a number of different suppliers within countries of the actual technology itself. So making
right,
sure that each version, whilst it should have been the same, kind of connected with the main sources, all of those areas that you would have thought had been set up to test this don't seem to have been done. Now, the system does work. It's just that
right.
the in some areas it doesn't. And the biggest issue that you will find is that the data is not transferred to the central source, EU LISA as it's called, which holds the biometric details, so your fingerprints and your
Hmm.
facial recognition. And that results in everybody having to register every time they go because whilst the passport details, you scan your passport on the screen, that piece has been transmitted. From my information is
Hmm.
the piece where you do your fingerprints and your biometrics doesn't actually transfer from a number of countries to the central source. And I speak
Right,
that from personal experience, having been to Europe 5 times and have to register 5 times and asking the question at the airport of why am I registering every time when I've done it? And that was basically the answer that I was given. And then some further investigation afterwards proved that it seems to be correct. So all of that area has created that. And the other big issue that you have is people arriving who are not regular travelers and may not be experienced in using the technology, particularly when we
hmm.
get to the season we are now. You've got people that go on holiday once a year, and with respect to them, it's quite a challenging and stressful thing being in this queue and trying to use it. And of course, it's taking longer than maybe it should do. And that's resulted in the queues and some of the actual systems going down because the pressure being put on the physical machines themselves in volumes just couldn't cope with it.
Right. Yeah, I've also personally experienced this kind of having to register multiple times every time I go to Europe. Um, so it seems like a problem that could be potentially fixed in the future if you have, the right systems in place. I know that airports have actually criticized the EU a lot for their response to this. A lot of big organizations like IATA, ACI Europe have called for the EU to allow airports to suspend the system temporarily just over this peak summer period. Um, do you think that the EU should have perhaps listened to these calls or perhaps made, steps to collaborate more effectively with airports prior to the implementation process?
I think absolutely the EU should
Mm,
listen to the calls for a suspension over the peak period because it's just
right.
doing a disservice to everybody around it and causing unnecessary stress to travellers. I mean, in any business, if something is not working and it is creating the kind of turmoil that this is, you've got to strip it back and say, let's suspend it until we can get it working. And I reiterate that the system is the right thing to do and they need to
Mm,
implement it. That's not an issue, but you don't carry on as it is. to give you another example, the listeners another example of how many people are aware about this, but there is also a app that was supposed to be produced that you
Right.
could
Yeah.
pre-register before you went. Now that's been in test in Sweden, I think two other countries in the Schengen zone for about 2 years. Now, in any business, if that was the piece of kit, if you like, that allowed me as a traveller to register at home before I got to the airport and take away some of that, you would have thought you would have the app up and running before you implemented it, and that may have avoided some of the issues we've got now. So there is the piece that is at the airport, and they should have coordinated closer with airports. But
Mm.
equally, there's a responsibility to say if you're going to offer this app, which is a very sensible thing, it's what you do with the States and Australia and everybody else, you pre-register, then that would have alleviated it. And I think that sadly, it's a whole reflection of disjointed implementation.
Right. Yeah. I know that Portugal and Sweden are currently the only countries using the app. And it does seem like it could have alleviated this problem a lot. Um, so, with your work with the BTA,
Mhm.
and your interactions with all the stakeholders, um, kind of how significant do you think the consequences of this disruption will be, for the industry in terms of both kind of lost revenues, maybe passengers will be put off from traveling to Europe over the summer period. What do you think will be the impact on the business travel sector and the tourism sector, and what can be done to kind of safeguard against this?
Yeah. Well, if I start with business travel sector, which is
Mm.
what we're clearly very close to, people still have
Mm.
to travel for business. And we around about 1 million trips our members will book over the peak months for business travel. So it's not insignificant, the travel in and out of Europe. So what we're seeing is people having to take earlier flights or later flights back to ensure that they've got time to get in. And whilst that doesn't seem much, that costs money and it's again further
Mm.
difficulties and putting stress on people. So I think the business travel sector is slightly different and people still need to travel. I suspect, though, having said that, we will see if somebody's traveling to a hotspot that is a tourism centre may decide not to go because if you're looking at some of the Spanish airports and Portugal in particular, there's been some horrific queues there.
Right.
They may avoid or put that trip back. So we see it as an irritation. Our members are advising travellers to be aware of what's happening, of course, and to make sure that they give enough time and choose the right flights that gives them that time. Because some of the issue, as you will be aware, as you talked about, is the getting on the flight coming home. Rather bizarrely, it's going through the system to get out of Europe that takes long, and why people are missing flights as much as the stress of getting in.
Right.
But for the leisure industry, I think it has the risk of being significant on top of cost pressures and everything else. It's just another decision-making process that traveling public will go through to say, do I really need to do that? Shall I holiday at home or shall I go somewhere else where I don't have to go through that process? So I think, the industry, why you're seeing people, as you mentioned before, from the airline industry directly are raising this as a challenge because it will have an impact on business for sure. And it's not just the direct cost of passengers not going, it's the cost of aircraft delays as they wait for passengers to come through, and all of those significant issues that are driven as soon as you start knocking aircraft off their slots and waiting,
Right.
that costs an airline money. So all of that is just not needed, particularly at a time when we're seeing record oil prices and the rest of the stresses in the geopolitical system. So put all of that together and you've got a recipe that it can only be probably negative for airline and travel companies, businesses, and we don't need it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do agree with you that the system has potential to, be a benefit to the industry. For example, I know um, the system caught 7,000 people who were overstaying in the Schengen area in the first 6 months of operation. So I do think it has the potential to be a success. But obviously steps need to be taken to reduce all these difficulties. Um, so apart from, getting more countries to adopt the app, um, what kind of steps do you think need to be taken now to, make the system a success into the future?
Well, it's simply making sure it works. So
Mm,
to add to your point, I think it's 40,000 people have been refused entry since it came in, and 1,000 have been stopped roughly on security
right.
issues. So that's what it does, and that's really good. But to make it work, we go back to the original point is making sure the systems work, that you don't need to re-register every time, that your biometrics are stored. So you miss the part where you go to the machine to register, you go straight to the border gate where you put your passport on and you have your eyes checked and you walk straight through, then that will work. So in some ways it's very simple to solve the issue. It's just to make the thing work.
Yeah.
But in practice, that clearly a little bit more difficult. And I think it's been rushed in now on the basis that we needed to do it, we committed to do it, and
Mm,
I agree with you. The EU said you've got to carry on with it, and airports and airlines are slightly up in arms saying this is damaging our business. So that's why we, as the BTO, said we should have it suspended through this summer. Take that time to take the step back and make sure the technology works, and maybe even switch it on gradually through the biggest countries or smallest countries, even building up to the biggest ones. Who knows? But yeah, a staggered rollout might have been a better way forward to test it. And I think that's the decision the EU needs to make now to make sure that this doesn't continue on and on and on, because that's the risk that we have, is it never gets fixed properly and it's always a bit of a botch.
yeah. Um, it does seem like, listening to airports and suspending the system at least temporarily would have been the right way forward. The EU said that Um, if different ha countries have different systems, that could cause a problem for passengers, especially if they left one country, there's no EES, and then they come back and the system doesn't recognize them. Um, so there are obviously some difficulties there as well. Um, in general, the EU appears to be moving towards a fully automated system into the future. Um, in your view, do you believe we need to be, moving towards this fully automated system, or do you feel like we always need to keep the human in the loop? Um, is there a way we can, you know, integrate all these digital technologies into the future without going through this kind of these periods of disruption again and again?
Well, I think go back to what I've said. I think the system
Yeah.
needs to be rolled out, and it's the right way forward. And it does work in similar instances around the world, including the UK, where we have electronic border control, as I mentioned earlier. So I think
Hmm.
we need to keep moving forward with it, and the EU are right to do so. But they also have ETIAS coming downstream, which is
Mm.
almost like stage two of this, which is pre-authorization to travel effectively, which is reliant on EES working. And now that was supposed to be rolling out in Q3, Q4 of this year, but
Right.
not being confirmed, as I'm sure you'll know in the journalist piece, but there's rumors around that that's now being pushed back to Q1 2027, which is hopefully the right thing to do, and does transpire to be the truth, because we can't have that loaded on top of an EES system that isn't working. So it will progress, and I think it's for the security and safety of countries and for the ease of travelers. It is the way the world will go to electronic border control. But it is always important to remember, in the industry that we're in, we're dealing with individual human beings, all who
Right.
are unique and have different reasons for travel, different understandings of the world of travel. So there's always going to be need humans, and I think those airports have learnt that lesson from this experience. Is you need a number of humans and staff available to assist people to get through. Because if you're in a small airport, kind of say Mykonos on a Greek island, you suddenly get three plane loads arrive, and you get three people who don't know what to do and no human help. Suddenly the queue backs up. Doesn't matter how proficient those are behind them. So it is always going to need human intervention at some point. And kind of ask airports to ensure that even when this gets working properly, we have staff around to assist passengers to get through.
Yeah, absolutely. I do think that's the right way forward. Um, so looking into the future, um, what do you think, um, international travel is going to look like in your opinion? Say 50 years into the future. Um, have you noticed kind of trends in risk analytics, data management? Do you think more kind of biometric security will be a trend in the future? Um, what's your opinion?
Well, the speed of change is massive, but
Mm,
again, what the thing to remember, even if you go back 60 years to back and then 50 years in the future, it's that point it's made it's still a human being that's going to be traveling and all the baggage, not physical baggage, but the baggage they take with them. But I think biometrics will become an absolute part of the future. You won't be needing e-tickets. Everything will be done through your biometrics, whether it's getting through the airport, security controls, or boarding your aircraft, and technology will play a massive part in all of that. And this is
mm,
just a blip in a very long game at ES where we're moving much more towards that. But people clearly will still very much need to travel. And I think all of this technology that is fantastic still needs to be powered by awesome human beings. And no matter how good, because this is a proving point, technology is not to blame here. It's the humans that put
mm,
it together that are to blame. That you're always going to make sure that there's the right level of support for the individual from there. But how much will travel change? It's a really difficult question to answer because I've been in industry
yeah.
40 years, and if I look over the 40 years, what's really changed is just the equipment that you use. The actual experience, in many ways, is still the same. And I kind of see that I won't be around in 50 years' time, but I don't suspect traveling to somewhere will be that much different. It will just be how you travel in the physical part you sit in. But I think it's been exciting to see the technology roll out, and it's kind of disappointing to see this have so many glitches because it does set back moving technology forward because people become skeptical about it,
Mm,
and you need people to support it and move on. But yeah, I think it will be very similar, and we will see technology playing an even bigger part in the way that you travel, and hopefully speeding up and making the journey through the airport frictionless, which is really what we all want to get to, is to take away that kind of feeling in the airport where am I going to get through on time? Am I going to get stopped? That would be a major advancement in 50 years, if you ask me.
yeah, absolutely. And I just hope that in a year's time, the entry exit system will have, all these problems sorted. It will be able to work effectively, and it will make people's lives easier, which is what technology is meant to do. Is meant to strengthen borders, keep us all safe. So I just hope
That's it.
that
And
will, you know,
it will transpire, and that's the important thing.
yeah,
In an ever more challenging world, we need to be safe and secure and be looked
right.
after and make sure that people are traveling. And this is why things like EES and ETIAS and everything else on top, whether it's ESTA in the US, is to making sure the right people are traveling, and that piece is really important. And we see a big trend is duty of care in business travel because the risk profile of traveling for work now to most places is huge. It's things like this that take a little bit of that risk away because we're sure that the borders are more secure than they were when human intervention was the only sole way of getting through. So I totally agree. I think it will work. Absolutely, we will get to work. It's just we've got to get through this and look back, as they always say, and learn from the mistakes. But it really shouldn't have been this bad.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. That seems like a good note to end on. Thank you for so much for coming on, Clive. That was a really interesting discussion. It's always, really important to hear the opinions of people on the ground, in the industry, experiencing this every day. Um, so thank you very much for sharing your insights. And to our listeners, I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Aviation Briefing. As always, if there are any other topics you want me to discuss or any other guests you want us to bring on, please do contact me on my social media channels. So thank you, Clive.
Thank you. Great talking to you.